the Discomfort with Data series, and this is the part one overview. This training is conducted on behalf of the Southwest Prevention Technology Transfer Center. So welcome you all. And on the next slide, we'll talk about our disclaimer here just for a minute. We won't go over this too much, but this work is supported by the Department of Health and Human Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, otherwise known as SAMHSA to most of you. And just to reiterate, the views, opinions, and content expressed in this product do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of SAMHSA. So we just wanted to make sure we covered that. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the overview of our series. So we have this really nice graphic that a colleague, Sheila, created. She's got a lot of artistic skills that I don't have. So I appreciate her putting this together. But today we're talking about the overview. Then we're going to talk about reading data. And so reading data will cover understanding it, what does data represent. Then we'll move down the road a little bit to talking about working with data, and that's how we acquire the data, cleaning it, sort of like you got to clean your house, right? You also have to clean the data, and then how to manage it. And then we'll move down the road to part 4, which is analyzing data. That's where we get into what some of you have already experienced a little bit with charts and things like that. You've been analyzing some data, you're doing some comparison, you're looking at trends and whether they go up or down. Also looking at breaking that data down by those subpopulations, right? To see if there's some differences. So that'll be part 4. And then we move into part 5, which is sometimes the overlooked piece of this, right? We might analyze our data, get that report sent off, but do we communicate it to our partners? And how do we communicate it? What audiences do we tailor our presentations and products to make it digestible? And so part 5 will cover that. And that involves something that prevention has to do a lot of, right? That messaging and visualizing data and being able to get that out to those legislators or policymakers and make it make sense. So that's kind of an overview of our series. And on the next slide, I just want to cover our objectives. So we're going to define the why of data for prevention and its benefits. We're going to list the 2 different types of data, and some of you may know what those are. Some of this might be new to some of you. Describe 2 methods you can use to communicate data graphically and when to use them. And lastly, we will list 2 ways to build your capacity with data. And this is where you'll get to share a little bit about how you will apply this to your own work. So on the next slide, let's talk about our little roadmap for the day. So our agenda will include introductions, which we'll do in just a minute. We will then move into talking about data and prevention. What are those benefits to using data and prevention? How can it help us do our work? We'll move into reading the data, working with that data, analyzing it, communicating it, and we'll wrap up. Now, this is just an overview. As you can see, it kind of follows our road, right, on the data literacy journey. So we're just going to touch on all these topics very briefly today to get you excited about the rest of the series. So this is just kind of a snapshot of some of the things that you'll be learning in the rest of the series, and it'll give you an opportunity to really provide some input as to what the next webinars in the series might look like. So it's a little bit more tailored to your needs. All right, so moving on to the next slide. I am Nicole Shaneborn, the program evaluator for the Southwest PTC. If you joined us a little late, I'm your facilitator moderator for the day. And then today we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Hayden Center, who is our presenter. And Dr. Center has most recently been on faculty at Auburn University, at Montgomery in the Department of Psychology, where he taught for 10 years. He has taught at several universities over the past 30 years and has also been a licensed professional counselor, specializing in addiction issues for over 30 years. Dr. Center has worked as a consultant in alcohol, tobacco, and other drug abuse prevention since 1987. He has also worked in the field of prevention for more than 30 years. With his data experience, Dr. Center served as the evaluator for the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention, Southeast Center for the Application of Prevention Technologies, and the Border Center for the Application of Prevention Technologies. He has also provided over 300 trainings and workshops on the topics of science-based prevention, evaluation, risk and protective factors, and sustainability. His experience includes working with several projects to develop databases, collect and interpret data, and produce data dissemination products and materials. So we are very honored to have Dr. Center with us today. He brings a wealth of experience around data. He has a lot of experience in the field, which, as you all know, in prevention is very important based on the context that we deal with. So I am now going to pass things along to Dr. Center. And he's going to talk a little bit about the history of evaluation and how it began.
Well, thank you, Nicole. And it is a pleasure to be with you today. I think I've been working with and cooperating with the University of Oklahoma's projects in prevention for probably about 25 years now. And it's always a pleasure to have old friendships and colleague relationships renewed. Now, as we move into this, I do need to let you know that my name is actually Hayden Center. That is not the name of a building. That is not a new place on the campus of the University of Oklahoma, where they are now housing the prevention program. My name is actually Hayden Center, and I've heard that my name sounds like the name of a building for years now, so that will not be a new one if you comment on that. We're going to have a somewhat relaxed time as we go through today because, I think part of this, the title, which Nicole actually came up with the title, and she's actually done a lot of this presentation in coordination with me. So Nicole, I need to give you even an extra set of kudos for what we do today. But ditching the discomfort. How many of us are really comfortable with data and evaluation and those kinds of things? And so that's really what we're going to talk about today, is kind of looking at this from a little bit different perspective, with the assumption that even those in the poll, so they really don't have any experience with this, that you can do it, and that we can make it a matter of fact, step-by-step process where you'll actually be able to understand data, collect data, analyze data, make sense of data, and communicate it in a way that others will understand and see the importance of it. Now, a lot of people are not familiar with how evaluation began as a discipline. So I need to tell you this. Now, I am adopting this story from Dr. Michael Quinn Patton. Any of you that know a lot about evaluation, you will know who Dr. Michael Quinn Patton is. Written utilization-focused evaluation, practical evaluation. And he's kind of been one of those mentors that I have followed through the literature, as well as I've had some communications with him. And he actually allows me to adopt his story of how evaluation began. Now, this is an important recitation here, so I have to move into solemn recitation mode as I share with you the story of how evaluation began. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he said, "It is very good." And on the seventh day, he rested. On the eighth day, his archangel came into him asking, "God, how do you know that what you created was very good? What was your criteria? Aren't you a little bit close to the data to make a fair and unbiased evaluation?" God's rest was greatly troubled. And on the next day, he called his archangel into him, saying, "Lucifer, go to hell." And thus Evaluation was born in a blaze of glory. We kind of have this feeling about evaluation many times that it's somebody doing something to us, and it's something that's going to be agony, and that it's, what are we going to do with it when it's done? Is it going to be usable? And so we need to start to look at some of those attitudes. And what I want to do is kind of challenge you, first of all, as I said before, that you can do this. Secondly, that you can do it well. Third, that you can do it and it's going to make you a more effective prevention provider and make your organization more effective, which means you change the lives of individuals, families, and communities. That's the only reason to do evaluation in my mind, is that it needs to be something that is usable, that makes our efforts better, that ultimately impacts lives. So, data discomfort be gone. Wow. Do any of you identify with that particular depiction in the photograph? Oh, it's all these numbers and I don't understand it and I don't know. And everybody, is going to make it so you have to be so. And we're going to stop for just a moment, step back, take some deep breaths, and we're going to start to get into this in a systematic, step-by-step, calm manner with some examples as we go along the way, you getting to interact as we start to really deal with this issue. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll want to come back to the other 4 modules, because we will have decreased some of your concern, decreased some of your fear, and you'll start to see, hey, if we take this step by step, we're going to be able to do this. So tell us your data story. We want you to respond in the chat room here, as we'd really like to find out from you, what is data to you? And so for just a moment, when you think about that word data, what is data to you? And so Nicole is going to monitor the chat, and she's going to tell us what some of those responses are. I'm also going to look here. A quantitative story. I see that Jody has answered there.
Yeah, and Hayden, looks like Joe has disaggregation opportunities.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Disaggregation, I love that word. Speaking my language.
And I forgot the rest of
numbers, yeah. Oh, Ashley. Did you see what Ashley wrote there, Nicole?
Yeah. What I need in my job to support qualitative stories I receive from stakeholders.
Oh,
awesome.
That's kind of cool. Yeah, so more than numbers is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. We're getting a lot of responses. A requirement to receive buy-in from the community.
Yes.
Let's see. Mindy says my whole job. Data for all physical and mental health to make a product for all the communities, especially for grant writers. So true.
Yeah, it can be very, very beneficial.
And let's see do you see our last comment there, Hayden?
Yes, data's validation. You're on the right path, or maybe you need to adjust.
Great. And then Mauricia says, so important for understanding where we are going and supporting our grant.
Absolutely. Really great responses there. Well, we have another chat. So this is, we just did the what. This is how do you feel about data and needing to gather it? How do you feel about it? What's your emotional response? And why do you have that emotional response? Taking people a little bit longer to respond, Nicole. Who lack confidence? Absolutely. Imperative.
Someone says, let's see, go back up here. Estrella says, I feel quite at ease with qualitative data. It's quantitative data that makes me feel overwhelmed.
Okay.
Mindy says, love the numbers, but enjoy the stories behind them, how we got here. How can we move forward, both positive and negative? Lots of mixed feelings, it looks like, Hayden. Love the
Yeah.
numbers. Mixed. I wish I need to know more. Some folks are new, so it's intimidating. Getting overwhelmed by big data. Confident in data, but the challenge is helping others see the value, as 93% of adults have some form of math stress. Yes, Joe, that's definitely true. Just the sight of numbers sometimes or data makes people run. Ashley says, love the data, but don't always love the availability. Analysis can be a challenge. So we're getting a lot, it looks like, around analysis, bringing on some fears or just not feeling confident. Mixed feelings. Lots of mixed feelings.
Yeah. Well, Casey says something that resonated with me. Data makes me batty when funders don't measure the same data points. That can be a challenge, can't it? Which really gets into that issue of knowing your audience and knowing what's going to serve each of your different audiences best with the data that you collect and analyze and present.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you for responding in the chat room, because, you really have to, I think, explore not only what something is, but how you experience it, to know kind of, okay, how do we move forward with this? And so basically, what are we doing when we are doing an evaluation? And so many of your responses here really kind of mirror what we anticipated here. So I heard in there, we're required to gather data. And I heard funders and other entities that say we have to gather data. We're required to gather data. But how many times do we gather data and then it doesn't get used? Or it's not in a way that actually someone can understand it, and it's not presented in a way that actually makes a difference in what we're doing or impacts our stakeholders or our key informants. So we're required to gather data many times, and this was also in the chat, lots of it. And when you have lots of it, how do you make sense of it? How do you decide what data is most important to focus on? How do you present that data with integrity? How do you look at parts of the data in relation to other parts of the data? So lots of data, sifting through that, making sure it's accurate, making sure that we understand it well enough that we can actually do something with it. Then what do we do with this information? And that becomes very, very important as we start to look at then how do we communicate it effectively. Now, I've been doing this for a long, long time, as Nicole mentioned in my quick bio there. But in 1989, I was part of an effort at Auburn University where we gathered data from every 7th, 9th, and 11th grader in the state of Alabama. 150,000 Scantron surveys in one office. We had to move a graduate assistant out of an office just to hold all of this data. And professors and assistant professors and associate professors would come by and they would look at all that data. And I mean, we had lots of data and lots of data points, and they would almost salivate because they could see all these publications and everything they could do with this data if they just had access to it. This was in 1989. I was just getting into the field. And so we analyzed that data back in those, any of you remember mainframe computing? Where you would analyze, use your SPSS or your SAS or whatever, and then you'd go up several floors and it would be printed off on this green and white paper that was very wide, and it would be very thick with lots of numbers all over the place. And they ran the data on 132 different school districts. And you know what they did? And this is not a criticism, it's just an observation. We then had a meeting statewide, every state superintendent there. I did not conduct this meeting. And guess what they gave them as their evaluation results? The binder of those computer printouts. Lots and lots of data not communicated effectively. And so if it doesn't get communicated effectively, I know where most of those reports ended up. Gathering dust on a shelf somewhere in the central office. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but we got to, why gather it? Why go through this process if we're not going to use it in some way that is going to communicate effectively for us? So there's several questions to ask. What is the data that you are presenting? And that again, is going to be in that first part and that next part in the next webinar, where we look at reading the data, getting comfortable with the data, and then moving to that question, well, why do you want to present the data? What's the purpose of this? And if it's to present it to a funder, then it may be that you need to answer the questions that the funder has already decided you need to answer. If it's to present data to parents in the community and show them the trends that are happening among their youth, that you need to know the why, because that then moves to the whom. And again, the whom that you're going to present to means that the data needs to be in different forms. The communications need to be in different forms so that it will speak to the audience. And so that's really kind of an overview here of what we're talking about. So let's start talking about what type of data are you presenting. And this again, and wonderful chat questions, Nicole, because it really got us talking about and kind of unearthing the idea that people have about data. I saw numbers and people even having math anxiety, and the fact that, oh, well, data is numbers. Well, data is actually can also be qualitative. So we have that quantitative data, which is really looking at, okay, we've maybe done a survey, and now we put all of the responses for item 1, and we look at the variation in those responses, and we put numbers associated with that. And everybody probably has seen, a strongly agree and agree, somewhat agree, somewhat disagree, strongly disagree. And then we put that into numbers, and we start to make sense of kind of how people's attitudes or their actions around something. That's quantitative data. But we also should attend to qualitative data. And qualitative data are those stories that many times explain the quantitative data. And it becomes very, very important to, in my mind, to really use both together to start to get a really depth picture of what's going on in the community. I do a lot of, and have done, you can probably pick up from my 1989 experience, that I got into doing a lot of community level drug prevalence surveys, and then learning ways to communicate that effectively to law enforcement and parents and school and others in the community. And so it becomes, kind of really important sometimes. Sometimes when we do a survey, we have as many questions posed as we have answered. And so I've used approaches, for example, where we do a survey, but then we do other ways of gathering data through interviews, and we'll talk about focus groups that then start to tell the story behind that data and starts to answer some of the questions we were not able to answer through a quantitative method. So everybody should be familiar with the SPIF the strategic prevention framework. There are 5 components of the SPIF. Realize I didn't say steps. I said components of the SPIF. And it's important to understand that this is not necessarily a purely linear planning model, but we do typically start at the assessment approach. And when we start to think about a grant project or a new program, we do a needs assessment. And as part of that, so that we can know the problem that is occurring, and we can know, kind of what the trends are, and kind of know how we want to start. Well, after you look at what the problem is, then you need to understand the capacity that already exists and do sometimes what's called a gap analysis, where you look at the gap between what exists and what you start to think needs to exist to address the problems that you found in the needs assessment. And then you move to the planning stage, where you take that information and you start to plan for your programs or your strategies and those kinds of things. And then you move into implementation. And implementation is where you actually start to put the plan into motion. And if it's a program, you start to administer the program. The program's going over time. You're hopefully getting the right people there, and you're starting to see some results, which moves into the evaluation phase. And then the evaluation phase many times, is starting to look at some of your very immediate outcomes, maybe even some of the midterm outcomes. And then you're also looking at who came, who received the services. And you may need to kind of go back to the implementation stage parts if you're doing early parts of your evaluation, because you're getting process data that, the right people aren't coming, or those kinds of things. All of this, then, the inner circle is you need to think about program sustainability, effort sustainability over time in each of these areas, as well as cultural competence. Needs assessments, for example, that are disrespectful are not going to be helpful and could actually hinder your effort. So this is the data and the strategic prevention framework. And what we'd like, again, we've got some chat questions. As I said before, we're going to be interactive in this. And the first chat question is, what areas of the strategic prevention framework do you feel data plays a role? Which of these 5 circles that overlap with each other, which of these does data play a role?
It looks like Joe says all, Hayden. We've got a couple alls.
Okay, Joe is that person. Whoop, I didn't mean to do that. Joe is that person on the final exam. It says because, or all, or always, and you kind of wonder what, you got to kind of give him credit for that, right? Susan likes that too. Maggie says could be any or all of these. Thank you, Ashley. But Ashley says, I do think it's especially important in capacity and assessment and evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Anybody else?
Joe says, define how formative and summative fit into each domain.
I'm assuming that is a question for me to respond to, Joe, rather than a statement for everybody to see. So, and there are different terms that are used. This is something that sometimes makes evaluation somewhat confusing, because we talk about outcome evaluation. Well, summative evaluation typically is more done at the end of a project, or the end of a project year or whatever, where you're taking all the data and you're putting it into this is what happened. It usually would include outcomes that have been identified. The formative is real important. I'm glad you asked. The formative, let's go to this, even capacity. As we're starting to build capacity and planning, we want to monitor that process, because when we get, for example, to the implementation phase, we want to be looking at it's maybe too early to expect outcomes, although we may have an outcome measure after the first session of a program. There are other variables that we need to be looking at. For example, who's coming to the program, who's getting reached here? Is it who we expected? Well, if it's not, we need to go back to the planning stage. We need to kind of look and make sure that the process is unfolding as we planned, and make sure, that in the implementation phase, if we're doing a program, we might need to be looking at fidelity. Is it being done in the way that it should be done? So formative evaluation is kind of also called process evaluation many times, where you're kind of looking at kind of how the program is developing, how it's unfolding, to make sure that it's happening in the way that you proposed. And if not, then you may need to make some adjustments. It also can help you explain some of your summative or outcome evaluation, because guess what? If we didn't meet the audience that really needed this, then we don't expect the outcomes to occur. Or, for example, if the attitude change didn't occur, then as a result of the program, then we kind of understand then why maybe behavior didn't change. So it really kind of helps. And isn't it sort of iterative? It is more than sort of iterative. I love that comment. It's a going back and forth. Absolutely. That's how the strategic prevention framework was actually designed. We like a step-by-step model. This is a continuous planning model that you never leave. You just continue to go through the process. And yes, you not only go forward, but you many times go a step or two or several steps back, not backwards, but back up the model. Very, very good. Great. Wow. I love I love these questions. They're working out well. So how have you used data in your work, especially related to the SPIF? How have you used it? I've answered how I've used it. How have you used it? Give you just a moment to respond. And thank you so much for your engagement so far.
Yeah, you guys have been chatting a lot. It's great.
Yes. Well, it helps me, Nicole, to know that they are out there and that they're listening. The data presentation hasn't put them to sleep quite yet.
That's good. Oh, Joe has a comment. Equity analyses.
Oh, wow.
That's great. Go up and see what else you got here. Trends, evaluation, consumers served.
Oh, I like that. Engage the community funders and others in the community. Great.
And we've got use of Excel, which is great. It's a good tool, but also says I'm not getting the best understanding with what's going on with my data. So we might be using tools, but may not be totally ready for that interpretation phase yet, or how it's working. Grant writing, tiered list of community needs. Yes, and engagement. So lots of a variety of how people are using the data.
Absolutely.
Great.
So what are the benefits of data? We always do an internal cost benefit analysis with anything that we do, right? And we look at, okay, what's the effort going to be and what's the benefit going to be? I think that we many times engage in activities where we see a benefit, rather than when we feel like we have to do something because somebody is making us do it. Now, I have worked with many grant-funded projects where someone is highly encouraging, if not making us do it, but still my attitude is, but it needs to be useful. And we need to find a way to do this that's useful for us, useful for the funder, because sometimes we can inform the funder of things that work or things that need to be attended to, but also that end user of our product. I believe they need to be getting benefit from what we're doing. So it's like our own report card, shows us what's working and what could be better.
Mhm.
Like a steering wheel and GPS. I like that metaphor or analogy there.
And
Ooh,
Ashley says identifies a problem, Hayden, that we didn't
yes.
realize we had.
Yes, and that's, you know, part of evaluation. A lot of people look at it as a report card, as I think was mentioned, but really evaluation is about learning. It's a continual process that doesn't, many times it shows some things we're doing well. It also shows some things we could do better. It also may show that we actually still have gaps in capacity. It might have shown that our plans that we really thought well actually don't work as well, and we're going to have to modify. So, you know, looking at data as being something that is useful to us, that has a benefit, I think is really, really helpful. Well, thank you for that participation. It almost looks like, Nicole, I could get the participants to do this.
And we definitely have a lot of experience in the room.
And they have great comments, and they're almost doing the presentation for me. So that's oh, but by the way, I'm not going to be sending any of them consultant checks, so don't count on that. Again, I'm a little off the wall sometimes. Hopefully that's okay. But let's just relax and enjoy this learning experience. What do you say? So benefits of data. Well, this probably all makes sense to you, but I want to make sure we're kind of all on the same page. First of all, it develops an understanding and kind of gives us a common understanding of what's going on. Like with a needs assessment, any of you ever been part of a coalition meeting? Because I've been doing evaluations for coalitions for about 30 years now. And with that, there's no needs assessment. So people, well, we need to do this. Well, we need to do that. Well, we need to do this. Well, we need to do that. Well, let's go ahead and do this. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. We don't even understand the problem yet. We probably need to gather some data, and we need to look at that data, and it's going to guide our approach. And we're going to be much more data driven and hopefully ultimately more successful. And I always feel like it's a real success when I work with a coalition and somebody on the coalition, rather than me having to say it, they're talking about, well, what do we do next year? And somebody says, well, let's go back and look at the data. And I'm thinking, yes, I've been successful. We're going to move towards being data driven and look at, you know, putting our resources towards what we have some justification are the problems. And we understand maybe even the risk factors and the protective factors that are part of this, and we can start to build an effort that may be more effective. It also develops partnerships. When I work with coalitions, they usually early on want me to come in and just do all the evaluation, and it's not going to work that way. We're going to work together because I want them to own the data. And so we're going to go through a process where everybody's going to have some input, but then will develop partnerships, because a lot of times we have to share data across agencies. And, you know, so you start to develop those kinds of partnerships. It also helps monitor progress. And that's real important. I've worked with one coalition for about 18 years, and you can see over time that, you know, coalitions kind of drift a little bit sometimes, but you can kind of get back to the data and start to see the progress, and people will start to get energized. It helps restrain over promising, which is real important. You know, I get back to, with everything that we need, that we do, we have to do it with integrity, which means our reporting our data, but we also have to be careful because implementation science, for example, tells us that sometimes when you start a new program, you're not really going to see the outcomes that you hope for a year, 2, 3, or 4 down the line. So you want to be careful. Integrating implementation science can help you understand the data, and it may not change quickly. And many times, again, there's a chain reaction process. That when you change one thing, it will eventually change something else, and eventually change something else. Obviously, facilitates project reporting. It promotes communication. And again, for years, this is why I've really focused on this. In fact, I saw where we have some people from Alaska, and I think 3 or 4 years ago, I went to Alaska and did a whole couple of workshops on this for the state prevention, because it just seems so important that we have all this data, and we spent so much time analyzing it, working with it. Now we need to communicate it, and prevention programs historically have kind of done excellent work, but haven't always gotten that out where the community sees it and others see it. So it also serves as an assessment and evaluation tool. You probably won't find too many people that get this excited about data. My passion will increase as we go through this presentation. You may get a little bit, you're going to have to spend a little bit of energy, but we're going to get through this, and this is going to be, I think, hopefully the start of a series that for many of you will provide you some tools that'll be helpful. So data literacy. So data literacy describes the ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data. So reading data, what does that mean? Well, you've got to be able to understand the strengths and the limitations of the data that you have. You have to kind of understand. And, I many times take people through a process where we get this data set, and then we look at, well, what does it mean? And then we go through a process as we start to work with it. I'll say, okay, because I'll start to put it into a little bit finer analysis. And so, oh, well, that's what it means. But then we'll do an even finer now. Oh, okay. Now I'm starting to see what it means. Oh, and then if we look at it this way, and we go through a process where we take a data set that meant nothing. You could glance at it and you had absolutely no idea what it meant. And we go through this process, and now we have something that we can then, as this expert says, we can argue with the data. We can use the data to show what we're doing. Use the data to make our point that what we're doing is important, the effort that's going in, as well as the outcomes that we see. So step 1 is read it. And as you read the data, it involves understanding what data is and what aspects of the world it represents. And so reading the data, again, is just becoming familiar with the data, making sure that the data represents what you hope that the data will represent. And so you become intimate with the data in step 1. So identifying types of data, and this was alluded to in the chat, but typically data is either in the quantitative data or qualitative data. Now, I started out being a big proponent of quantitative data. I loved numbers. Yes, I did. And any of the others of you that love numbers, we many times are in the minority. So after this particular webinar, we will be holding a support group for those of us that love evaluation and numbers, because we need to support each other. And I'm just kidding about that. But quantitative data when I entered into the field, was seen as, oh, no, that's real data. Qualitative data didn't have quite the same following at that point in time. But as we've moved forward, we've understood two things. One, it's not an either or, it's a both. And that quantitative data and qualitative data work very, very well together to really provide us that depth understanding of a program. I'm going to share that with you in just a moment, my actual experience with that. So what is it? Qualitative data is data that consists of descriptive information that cannot be expressed as a number. Types of data, text-based, you may analyze a text, images, behaviors, objects. How do you collect it? Well, interviews, you've all heard of key informant interviews, focus groups. I've conducted numbers and numbers of focus groups. You may look at written documents, even meeting minutes, open-ended survey questions. Well, an open-ended question. What did you think about this program? What are some examples? Well, favorite food, gender, quotes, race, ethnicity, all qualitative data. Quantitative data are those numbers that some of you, again, have some issues with, but these are measures that can be quantified and put into some sort of numerical set. So surveys are probably the most common way that data is gathered. We love surveys because they're many times seen to be easier to put together. We can now with all of these different, like, I'll just state the one that I use, SurveyMonkey. You can put together a survey, you can send it out, and you'll very quickly get results back, and it all kind of goes into those neat little number places, and you can start to see the trends. And I love to see the graphs, and I start to get excited about that. But surveys do also have their limitations. Tests, assessments, measurements, observations, interviews, and we all know weight, IQ, and other types of quantitative data. But in my experience, both are important. And again, I go back to surveys that I've done, for example, in communities where we gather quantitative data and we start to understand, for example, that the adolescents in the community think that alcohol is readily available. They think that all their peers are drinking alcohol. They think that that parents don't mind about that. So then I would go in and do focus groups and would ask questions, and we would start to understand the underlying patterns behind that. And after a while, we actually knew exactly where the parties were happening, exactly, kind of what was happening at the mall, where adolescents were going in the front door young adolescents, after the parents dropped them off. They were changing clothes in the bathroom, going out the other, and getting in cars with people driving around and coming back, and reversing that process as they showed up, and parents assumed that they were in the mall the entire time. Those are the kinds of things that qualitative data can tell us about needs assessments. I can ask, I can look at the number of people that say they were impacted by a program, but then I can interview one of those people and see the real life changes that occurred with that, quote those and show those and organize those. Sometimes that is very, very persuasive. So identifying types of data is very, very important. So in your work, what's an example, and this is a chat question, what is an example of your work in qualitative data? How have you used qualitative data? And again, I'm going to monitor the chat with you, Nicole.
It's like folks are thinking.
Yes. Well, they've been overpowered by someone who is offer training evaluation to make sure our trainings are actually valuable to staff.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
And Hayden, we may need to only take one or two here so we can,
We need to move on.
yeah.
All right.
I know there's so many great comments though coming in.
Who do adolescents turn to when they're struggling with substance misuse? Cool. All right. Well, Nicole is doing a better job of watching the time than me. But I got to read this one from Joe in Alaska. I've begun the process of starting to utilize ripple effects mapping as a participatory, appreciative method of qualitative data collection. Kind of cool.
Awesome.
Very good. And do we have any examples of quantitative data and that you've used?
April says utilizing youth interviews to engage community stakeholders.
Absolutely. Well, I'll let you continue to monitor that, Nicole. And since time is of the essence, I'm going to move forward here.
All right. Thanks, Hayden.
Yeah. So we have an activity. What's my data persona? And Nicole, you may want to help me with this.
Sure.
But we would like for you to kind of take this, what would you call it? Kind of an assessment, Nicole?
Yeah. And they actually received this ahead of time, those of you that registered. So I think in the interest of time, we can go ahead and pull up the poll. And this is just has a little description there. If you didn't have a chance to take the survey, you can kind of select the one that fits you the best there. But when you get the chance, take that little assessment. If you haven't already, it's pretty fun. And it gives you some resources that you can connect to based on what you end up with there. So go ahead and fill out the poll here. Give you guys a couple more minutes and then we'll go ahead and bring up the results.
Got a lot of data nights and data dreamers, huh? I live outside of Nashville, Tennessee, so I'm going to fade to the fact that data dreamers may be a good country music song. I don't know.
It does sound like a good country music song.
Yeah, I'm starting to think of maybe lyrics we could create as we're talking here.
Well, Hayden, maybe you can sing that song at the next webinar.
I tell you, Nicole, if we did that, I can forecast what the evaluations would say qualitatively and quantitatively at the end of that.
There you go.
They would not be good.
Well, let's see what we've got here in the audience. Richard, do you want to bring up the results there? All right, we've got mostly data nights and data dreamers.
Wow. So, no data doubters.
That's great.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Well, thank you for participating in that. And we're going to move forward. Now we're going to work with the data. It involves creating, acquiring, cleaning it, and managing it. And Nicole talked about this earlier. You're very familiar, I'm sure, with creating data, acquiring it, even managing it, but it has to be cleaned. And I have worked with some projects that gathers data, and that cleaning process really revealed something that's real important. If we go back to that large data set that we had with 150,000 students in the state of Alabama, one of the results of that when we analyzed the data was in the opposite direction that anybody expected. And The tenured professor who was presenting it was, saying, well, I just don't understand why this happened, but this must be a trend that we have. And so we continued to look. I said, that just can't be right as a lowly graduate student. And we looked at it, and when we looked at it, the variables had gotten reversed in the analysis. So it wasn't a trend that was reversed. It actually was a mistake in how the data had been coded. And we went back to the coding and looked at that and then realized, oh, okay, it's not. But if we had reported that result, then it would have been inaccurate. So collecting data. Focus groups. How many of you are familiar with focus groups? Now, focus groups are a great way to collect data. What we talked about focus groups. Now, that would be a qualitative way of gathering data. You bring a group of people. You typically are very intentional in who you invite and who you bring, which means that with focus groups, you're going to get really depth information, but it's not necessarily representative of everybody in the community or whatever groups these people may represent. Then you have key informant interviews where, many times I'll interview some school officials. I may interview someone in law enforcement, others, to just kind of get an idea of what's going on, or after a project has been going, to see what their observations are of what's been happening. Then observation, where you just kind of go and watch something and to see how it may be changing over time. Surveys, as we talked about before, are just really ways to get snapshots of what's going on in a community. And then service records might be another type of data that is collected. So acquiring existing data. How many of you have had to request data from an existing source at some point in your work? And this is a raise hands questions. I do. There we go. Boy, you are so good at this. Yeah. Okay. Wow. And I'm getting to see photos of many of you as we do this. So in the chat, what were some of the challenges that were associated with that? Gathering that data that already existed. So as you start to talk about the challenges, Nicole, if you'll interrupt me in a little bit and watch that, I'm going to say some of the things that we need to be aware of as we acquire existing data.
Sure.
First of all, how was the data collected? What was the method, the format? Because you didn't acquire the data, you're going to need to understand that. Just as an example, if you're looking at driving under the influence trends in a community, well, you need to know if the data that was collected, was that collected just on convictions? Is that collected on the number of arrests? Is that collected on the number of people that may have been pulled over? And so, that may vary pretty tremendously depending upon how the data was collected, and then what was the original intent of the data. Because if you don't understand that, you might actually misuse the data. And then, is there a request process to access the data? And data absolutely should be protected. And we should make sure that especially sensitive data is only released to those that is going to use it properly with all the necessary permissions and confidentiality and anonymity and those kinds of things. So is the data anonymous? And are there those permissions or confidentiality concerns?
Yeah, so Hayden, some of the challenges of the themes, it looks like, are finding those data gatekeepers, accessing the data, the accuracy of the data was mentioned several times, that that folks receive, as well as data being in an aggregate form where they can't break the data down with the raw data. So those are kind of the themes that we're seeing in the chat.
It's many times much more challenging, Nicole, to get someone to give you a data set that you can then work with than it is to get aggregated data, which again, you can't disaggregate. So I think that's really, really an important point there. So cleaning the data, explore the data, get familiar with it, change the data, for example, to match a specific format, perform basic calculations. It sounds like some of you use Excel to check for errors in the numerical data. And then there is a resource here, Open Refine, which is a free software that helps you clean up messy data, as well as get back to, as I mentioned before, the data dictionary, where you're looking at the coding of the data to make sure, again, that that is all in order. Oh, I went the wrong way there. I apologize for that. So step 3, we move into analyzing the data. And this is a very, very important step, because now this is where you're going to start to make sense of the data. And you can analyze data in a way that actually doesn't necessarily represent it with integrity. So you have to go through, and I like to go through a process, you know, of looking first of all at just the distribution of the data and start to understand that, and then, you know, looking at different ways that we might do comparisons, and, you know, looking at kind of the composite of the people maybe that have provided the data that the data represents. And so it's a really, it's kind of a creative process, but it also is one that you need to go through systematically and make sure that you do it in a way that ultimately, after you analyze it, that the data is going to be representative. So questions to ask yourself: am I being systematic? Am I going through a systematic process? And we're going to talk about that. I think it's the third, it's either the third or fourth of our next seminars, but giving you a systematic process to go through so that your analysis makes sense. So is it useful? This is a question. Does it have impact? Does it affect the quality of a program or strategy? And then can it be effectively communicated to stakeholders? Many times, for example, when we just have raw data that then is analyzed where we're just in descriptive data, where you just have the results of each question, for example, if it's on a survey, that doesn't tell you nearly as much as you do something called cross-tabulation, when you start to look at the relationship between one response and another response. And this may start to give us a more depth type of information, all stuff that we will deal with in the in one of those components. So prevention analysis basics, ratios, relationship between two numbers, a proportion, a ratio where the numerator is included in the denominator, so the number of male babies born in relation to the total babies born, and then proportion with the specification of time. I'm not going to go through this at this point, because again, we will do this in a finer grain analysis in a later webinar. All right, so communicate it. Arguing with data involves using data to support a larger narrative intended to communicate some message to a particular audience. You've got to know your audience, and you've got to be able to put the data in a way that will speak to that audience. I love, for example, this particular depiction here, because you can look at this. First of all, you have different colors, which makes it visually appealing, but you can look at this and you can gather some really important information almost instantaneously. Someone doesn't have to read a depth report and put this together with this. And so how you communicate it. And let me tell you, if you give very busy people, say on a board, a 50-page evaluation report, they're not going to look at it. Well, some will, but you know, it has to be an executive summary, 2 or 3 pages that really hits the highlights of the data. Sometimes, again, doing presentations where you have just 2 or 3 of these very well put together depictions of the data is going to be much, much more effective. So there's some different ways that we can tell your data story. We want it to be intentional, purposeful, visually pleasing, as well as independently interpretable. If we went back to, again, the depiction on the earlier slide, you get the whole story there in just kind of one big snapshot. Very, very effective way to communicate the data. So here are some different ways that data can be communicated. If we want to look at the composition, you know, for example, who responded to the data, then we would look at pie charts, stacked column charts. These are just some examples. If we wanted to do a comparison, and you know, people who do evaluation always have their ways that they are you know, kind of more likely to use. I use a lot of the column charts because you can start to see, for example, if we do the 7th, 8th, and 9th, the 7th, 9th, and 11th graders in 2017, and then we're comparing that to the ones in 2019, and then the ones in 2021. It's a real great quick visual to see that, to see those comparisons. If we're looking at the relationship that one variable may have to another, then that's going to be depicted in a different type, maybe a scatter plot there. And then if we're looking at distribution, we may be looking again at the trends of the data at several different, or look at the distribution of the responses of the data in the data set. For example, you see something that somewhat looks like what might be called the normal curve. And with a lot of phenomenon that we measure, it actually does conform to that normal curve. So these are some different ways, again, that you can represent the data. So now what we would like to do is let you play with this for just a moment and find out what chart you would use. I'm going to go back and forth as we do this. I'm going to read the question to you, give you just a moment to think, and then we're going to do a poll. So let's say you want to display rates for substance use by year over a 10-year time period to show an increasing trend. Which of these would you use? Seems like we have a lot that are saying line graph, bar chart. Very good. All right. So we see that most believe that maybe a line graph would work, and they see that as kind of the best way to do that. Let's now go to the next question. You want to compare different percentages by grade level for parental monitoring. Percentages do not necessarily add up to 100%. What chart would you use? All right, we see bar chart as being very, very popular choice there. You want to show participants by gender who participated in your recent SAPS training, substance abuse prevention I know the last is training. The data captures 3 gender categories and the total adds up to 100%. Which chart would you use? All right, and the last. You want to show the distribution of scores on the prevention specialist exam in your region. All right, and we see scatter plot or histogram. Again, we'll go in this in more depth and look at what are some of the benefits and what are some of the limitations of using these different ways of representing data. But again, I think the takeaway point is to make sure that we communicate our data in a way that it, first of all, has integrity, but also in a way that will be visually appealing and will provide the story that we want to tell in a persuasive manner. So data, according to Stephen Levitt, is one of the most powerful mechanisms for telling stories. I take a huge pile of data and I try to get it to tell stories. And again, as Michael Quinn Patton says, there are 2 types of information that people pay attention to. One is statistics, but then I think we also have to remember some people are a little bit skeptical of statistics. I don't know if you know what Mark Twain said about statisticians, but he said there are 3 kinds of liars. There are liars, damned liars, and statisticians. And I think he was assuming that the 3rd category might have been the worst. So as we add then the stories, as Michael Quinn Patton says, people really pay attention to quotes, and that really provides that depth information. And so if you can put together a story that makes sense, then people will understand what you're trying to do. They'll understand your program and hopefully understand the results that you're getting. So data can tell very, very powerful stories. All right. So I think we're moving in, are we not, Nicole, to the wrapping up phase at this point?
Yeah.
And yeah, and boy, the time has really gone quickly for me, maybe not as quickly for the participants, but wow, we covered a lot in a short period of time. I just kind of want to go back for just a moment and talk about what we've talked about so far. Again, the purpose of this first webinar is really to just lay out an outline of this whole data acquiring, thinking about usefulness, presenting it in a way that's going to be effective, looking at kind of all those aspects of that and really just touching on each of those, really to kind of lay the framework for other webinars where we could go through and actually in kind of semi-working session where we hopefully get even more interaction than we got today, to really take each of these major components and really have an opportunity for us, Nicole and I, and anybody else that she recruits to be part of this, that we can take you through a process step by step, how you deal with each of these major issues, but in a way that would be interactive, where you not only could start to practice some of the skills, but ask your questions in more depth and hopefully have something that you could translate then into into usable tools. And so as part of that, then we went through, you know, looking at the data, starting to really get familiar with the data, then being able to make sure the data is accurate. And then what does the data mean by thinking about how data relates to other data and what does it describe? Looking at, well, we probably need a mix of quantitative and qualitative data, and then moving towards what is going to be for me the webinar, which is how to communicate effectively. That's kind of my big passion, is how do we take this information and how do we make it usable? Because what I have found working with numerous entities, especially coalitions, is that once you can start to show your progress through data, and if people have gone through a process where they are buying into and moving towards being data driven, and you can see actual results there that are tangible, people start to get energized. It's actually what I think you have to keep the effort going. But guess what? Nicole mentioned that I've done a little bit of work in sustainability. In fact, published an article in 2004 on sustainability, and have done a lot of work in that area, continue to work. Data, getting good data, telling your story is one of the most important elements in sustaining your effort over time. So it's not only important for now, it's important for later. And then you start to recruit your champions and inform them about all the efforts you're making, and they start to see the importance of your program and the efforts. And so they'll go, you know, and they'll influence others. And then you have all those people, as Nicole mentioned before, that are those kind of key leaders who will determine where resources go and efforts need to be. It really is a process that I believe can move us to doing things more effectively. So I'm really hoping that we can provide tools and information in a way that will be helpful. Now, Nicole also mentioned that we would really like, since we have some time before the next one, we'd really like to know what your needs are. And we could tailor those presentations. I mean, I see them as being more kind of almost work-oriented. But not work as a bad thing, but being able to be even more interactive as we start to deal with this. But if there are specific issues, I won't promise that we will address them, but we'll certainly see if there's a way for us to address them.
And we've had a couple comments already, Hayden, about some things that folks would like to see. Melissa mentioned some things around percentage changes. And so anything that you all would like to post in the chat around your needs would be great.
Absolutely.
And think about it in the frame of our steps here. So, you know, we have the next one is reading data. So that'll be kind of, you know, like, what do you do when you look at an article? What are the things you need to know? How do you understand that? All the way to analyzing data and communicating it. So anything you have around any of those topics, please feel free to send to us.
Absolutely.
And yeah, LaShonda, let's go to the graphic here. Hayden, if you want to just forward to the next slide. So our graphic here, if you look at the overview, you can think about framing your needs around these other 4 areas here. And anything you have related to those that you'd like to see, please share in the chat. And I'll share my email later in our slide deck, and you can also email me. And Melissa said, yes, determining the significance of percentage change was something that she would like to see. So that we would cover in our analyzing data. Right, Hayden?
Yes, and that's actually a very, very important point, because I have seen this done many times in ways that I don't think are the best representation of the data. And so, you know, even looking at changes in percentages, you know, need to be very, very carefully considered, especially looking at actually the number of people that are actually responding in that particular item. Small numbers, one or two number changes can make a percentage actually not be a very accurate way of presenting that data. So there are some nuances that we definitely need to pay attention to, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Determine the significance in order to determine the best data to present. And and hopefully I've not been guilty of doing this, but sometimes, again, data that's really tangential and not really key to the project is presented, and it can be somewhat confusing. And you have to be, we have to never always make sure that we are presenting all the data that needs to be presented, because I do get challenges sometimes, around data, and why didn't you talk about this, that, or the other? But I didn't talk about this, that, or the other because I didn't think there was an accurate way with integrity to share that data. You have to know, this is one of the challenges about using data that already exists and the purpose of the data. You can't kind of make the data fit your questions sometimes. And sometimes, we're tempted to do that.
Yep. Especially when it involves that grant funding, right?
Well, there's all kinds of pulls that we have, but I think we have to ultimately see that when we are self-reflective in a very transparent and honest way, that's how we'll actually make growth.
Mm-hmm,
so it's becoming, and I think that gets back, Nicole, to the title of this, is ditching the discomfort. I mean, it's really being an organization or a group that's willing to self-examine honestly and deeply, because that's how you make change.
Mm-hmm.
And data can help you do that if, again, you take a systematic process and you're willing to look at the data honestly. Your first year program, you may not see any change in some of the very outcomes that you had hoped. Mm-hmm. There may be a reason for that in the process, or there may be that it's just too early to expect that.
Yeah, that's really true. I think that there's a lot that goes into looking at data that we often don't think about. And so, Hayden, I think you've done a wonderful job of just introducing everyone to the journey that we're going to go on. I do want to mention to you all that we haven't picked an exact date yet for the next step in our journey, but it will be after the holiday. We'll let you take a break, and it will be probably around the end of February, early March that we set that date. And so we'll be communicating with you, and Wanda has posted a link to make sure you're on our contact list. And Richard is also posting our website. So make sure that you check there, get signed up to our listserv. We'll also be sending out these materials and the recording in a week. So just make sure you look for those things. I know we get lots of emails sometimes, so just wanted to give you a heads up about watching out for those things on your email. So let's go back, Hayden, back one slide.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to just talk about some takeaways today that we want to make sure that we address with you all. So Richard, there's a couple chat questions that what is one way you will ditch the discomfort with data after today's presentation? So I just wanted to ask you all that. What is something that you learned today that will help you ditch the discomfort? And this just gives us an idea of what we've helped you learn and what you're going to take with you. Open, refine. Oh, awesome, Joe.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
Always nice when you get an actual tool that you can use.
And George says, fit the form to the function.
Mhm.
Any other things that you're going to take with you after today's presentation?
Well, I think everybody has to admit they now know how evaluation began, Nicole.
With your story.
Story about that. I like what Kathleen says. Find it comforting that we're almost all at a level to learn more and expand our understanding.
Yeah, she said she learned a lot and joined late, unfortunately. Oh, I'm sorry about that, Kathleen. We will have a recording coming out in about a week. So if you missed anything, I know a lot of us have lots of meetings these days. So if you missed anything, we will be sending out that recording in about a week.
Was it for data love? Well, you know what, Casey? Let's go ahead and schedule that so we can have that support group. I used a kid that I was gonna write a book that evaluators are people too. No, really, evaluators are people too, because we do tend to think somewhat differently at times. But if you are an evaluator, you have to realize that not everybody thinks in the same way that you do, and you've got to find a way to communicate effectively with those. So, everything that we do is going to be ultimately based in practicality.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Joe's got to go off to a conference. Well, thanks, Joe. You had a lot of great feedback today. We really appreciate your participation.
And the fact you got up so early to be part of this.
Right. Our folks from Alaska. Oh my goodness. You were up at 7 this morning. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate that. Thanks, Joe. You have an awesome day too. All right. Well, I think, Hayden, let's move on to the next slide. And we went over our next journey. So here are some resources for you all. We went over the data literacy quiz earlier and put that in the chat, the data visualization 101. And that just shows you how to design charts and graphs and when to use those. And sometimes that's confusing. We also have how to tell a story with data, a guide for beginners, telling those data stories, just a really nice tool that walks you through that. And again, we'll be going over some of these in more detail, but just wanted to offer those to you at this point. So on the next slide, we have ways to connect with us, and we have our website, which we've posted in the chat. And make sure you join our mailing list. We have several ways that you can connect with us, downloading our products and resources. All of this is available from our website. So please visit our website. There's a lot of great resources there, new events coming up, newsletters, recordings, etc. And then on our next slide, we've got our evaluation, which is also extremely important. And Richard has posted that link in the chat there. Sometimes our link on the Zoom isn't a live link. So you can also use your phone if that's easier. You can use your camera to take a picture of that QR code there, and it will take you right to the survey as well. And that assists us in planning our future events. So we really appreciate your feedback with that. All right. And on the next slide should be my contact info. And this is where you can send us further ideas that you have about the series.